Hello, everyone. This is Joachim Stroh from Brooklyn, New York. We are on our weekly Social Ledger Next Generation meeting. And today I want to talk about a presentation I prepared around the business context of the Social Ledger. So I will show you a few slides of a new presentation. I don't think anyone has seen it yet. That is based on a presentation that Philip Sheldrake has actually put together about, when was it, two and a half years ago? And I highly encourage you to look at that presentation. I'll post a link to that later on. And see this as a sort of a part two of his presentation. It's a great business context, and I think it applies very well to the social ledger, the next version of the social ledger. So this is a little bit new now because it sets the stage for a kind of different context. It expands it, I think, pretty, it goes pretty further, out to the edge. And I just wanted to bring this up here and to see how it resonates with you guys. If that goes too far, if that's right in the context, and we could potentially take this thing.
Can you put the link in the text chat maybe, or on
oh, right,
somewhere?
Yeah. Let me do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have to post it separately later because this is not going to be part of the recording. All right, so let me switch screens. Open this new thing. All right, have a seat. Grab your popcorn, and Robert is just on time. Hi there.
Hello.
Thanks for joining. So just to recap for a moment, I'm going to show you a new presentation here that is based on a presentation that Philip Sheldrake gave about 2.5 years ago. And he introduced a concept called the human organization in that deck. And I'll provide a link to that later. But I took that and created sort of a part two here, and want to bring this closer to the next generation social ledger. So it provides kind of a business context for this social ledger too. That goes a bit further than you would expect with the social ledgers. So it broadens really the context further out. And this is the first time I'm showing this presentation here. We're recording it, so you can share that later with other folks. But let me step you through the slides. And as usual, stop me at any point and ask some questions about this. All right, so the human organization. This is about building organization from the ground up, right? It's also the theme of, I think, the social ledger too, which says you can start something new just using kind of a deck of cards and bring folks together and start your organization. So that's kind of the theme I wanted to bring into this part here, which uses the context of the human organization. So it all started in Philip's deck actually with a definition of organization. What is organization, right? Two definitions or two meanings to that word, right? One is the definition of the coordinated body of people, right? Coming together with a particular purpose. And the other one is the action of organizing something, right? So doing something, organizing things, to group things, to relate things, to find things. So that's the other meaning of the word organization, right? So I took these two words now and said, okay, great. That's a good foundation to say an organization is really a coordinated body of people, that is organizing a body of work through actions. As simple as that, right? So it's one definition of what organization is and does, right? So on the left side, you have the body of people. Hold on, let me see if I can turn on my laser pointer. You guys see my laser pointer?
It's there, yeah.
Good. I love the laser pointer. So the body of people here working on something called the body of work. So anything that the organization creates, right? The body of group people creating something, some output here on the right side. So if that's the high-level definition, let's take a look at part one and drill down into the body of people. So what does that mean when a group of people coming together and form sort of a coherent piece of organization, and I'm starting to look at some of these more progressive ways of how do you organize a body of people here. And so I'm going to introduce you a few thinkers in these areas, people I know that have spent a lot of time in their lives on coming up with a better definition of how do you get a body of a group of people, a body of people together and work together in a coherent fashion. So the first one is you probably know him. That's John Husband, who coined the term hierarchy, right? So hierarchy in his definition is a dynamic two-way flow of power and authority based on knowledge, trust, and credibility, and a focus on results enabled by interconnected people and technology. So this definition of what an organization is resonates very much, I think, what we're doing here, whereby there is dynamic flows of power and authority. There is knowledge, trust, credibility that we're building inside the tool sets we're creating, and the focus on results, right? So you want to have some outputs and some documents, some things, some social objects that are created, enabled by people who are participating in this. So to me, the blue areas here connotate sort of the bodies here I'm talking about, and John's notion of the hierarchy. He has the traditional organization, right? That's the triangle here, the hierarchical organization. But then there's this connection to this other part, to these networks that are reaching outside the organization. Maybe part of the organization, maybe not part of the organization, right? But reaching into these networks that are happening inside the triangle, right, and outside the triangle. So that's John's definition of one form of organization, right, called the hierarchy. Another guy called Esko Kilpi, a Finnish guy from Scandinavia, talks about interconnected patterns. That's another interesting definition of a body of people. So he's talking about what an organization becomes, emerges from the sense-making relationships of its members, rather than being determined by the choices of a few powerful individuals. So very much, again, a definition based on a network, a connected network of people, right? So ideas floating by the connection and the relationships these people create inside this body of work, right? Rather than having some nodes that are more powerful than others, right? Or some nodes that are higher than others. So a really flat view of the world, and something that emerges. I like his definition of, the sense-making and the relationships of the members, and that organization emerges out of this kind of structure. So that's Esko Kilpi. Here's Harold Jarkey. He has, coined this term of the networking learning model, which is a way for him to describe the difference between work teams, communities, and networks, right? So to me, this is, again, there's a body of work around all three areas of these. So the work teams he puts on the lower left side of this diagram, which is the unified and collaborative pieces. So close working relationships, and he sees that as a controlled way, a hierarchical way. But to me, this is further out here, where it is a coherent place. Oh, sorry about that. It's going to ring 3 times. A coherent place where you get your work teams together to work on certain projects, certain purposeful activities that are anchored around a certain body of work. But then further you move out here to the top right, you get into more open and networked environments, right, that are more diverse, more cooperative. So this is where he describes the communities, and further out there is the network itself. So see it as something like social networks up here. Dig Live is one community in the center, and then what we have inside the membership Mattermost space as the different work teams and the channels, right? And what he also describes is sort of boundary protocols between them. This to me is a very interesting aspect of how do you move from one space into another, right? So one boundary protocol for us is, for example, getting people from a community, a public community, into a work team space. So the onboarding process for new team members, working in circles is one of these boundary protocols that would sit at the intersection of these two types of work environments. Right. Okay. So that's hierarchy. Let me put in a quote here from John Keldon, who's running the conversation community. So he describes this as an ongoing narrative alignment between the happiness inherent in our individual quest and the one of belonging that comes with realization as the work. So John is always out there at the edge, describing really fancy concepts. So in this case, he was talking about eudaimonia, and how does it relate to work, to our work, to our lives' work. And to me, this is a very fascinating aspect too here, to look at the narrative alignments here between people, players, actors in these networks, right? So it's the tension between the individual quest, that we all have, finding something in these networks, and then the belonging that comes with actually realizing these connections and make that part of our work. So that to me is an interesting aspect too. I've done some work in the past here. This is one of my diagrams that talk about work, play, and learn. So these are three circles here that overlap. One is about working, one is about playing, one about learning, right? So to me, the goal here is moving to the center of this triple Venn diagram, where work is play is learning. And what does that mean? That means, a lot of people see work as work, right? So working is working, and I show up in the morning at my desk, do my work, and go home, right? There's no fun. There's nothing I learned there. It's just my work. Others see learning is learning. There's a part of my life where I learn. I go to college, I go to university, and I learn, right? So that's the learning environment. It has nothing to do with my work, and it's not fun either, right? And then another group here, another circle is playing. So people would say, I'm setting time aside for play, right? And this is good, and it helps me, distance myself from the work and distance myself from learning, right? So you could say, one way, if you stay in these outer edges, is I separate everything. I separate these three sets, right? So my life is around work from 9 to 5, right? Then maybe some learning things I do in the evening, and then maybe some playing with my kids, right? Could be my life. The notion here is of creating this human organization is to say, start to overlap, trying to overlap these diagrams, the sets here in the Venn diagram. So between work and play, that means, some parts of work can be fun, right? You're doing this because you enjoy it. You can overlay, work and learn. So you learn actually stuff while doing the work. And between play and learn, the learning process could be fun too, and it could be interesting, could be drawing in other people, it could be collaborative, it could be many things that make the learning process more engaging, more fun, right? But the ultimate goal is really to get to a point where all these three, starting to overlap and become one in this kind of human organization, right? Where it is work, yes, but it is fun to do, It's not, something I suffer every morning, every day. And I learn. Every day I come here, I learn. So it's kind of a little bit what we're doing with Dig Live, right? So it's place. It's not really, an income generating work environment, but we do some work here. We do have fun, and we learn tons of stuff, right? So this kind of environment for me is also another foundation to see to look at bodies of work, right? So people coming together and organizing in some ways. All right, so here's the question now. Now we've seen this body of people, right? What's the missing ingredient here? So what would it take to actually take all of these bodies of people and then get to a more flourishing state, right? And the reason why I'm saying this, if you look at this from an isolated point of view, right? So these guys are doing something, these guys are doing something, these guys, everybody's involved in some kind of an organization, right? And some work, some don't work. We know there are, statistics that say, disengagement is really high in organizations, and people don't really want to go to work. But what if we find a way to sort of connect these islands here and say, hey, let's see if there's a sort of a meta body, as I call it here, that begins to reflect, focus, and amplify these body of people into a coherent, more powerful value ecosystem. And that to me is kind of the function that I see us doing right now with onboarding entire collectives, right? So the onboarding is a function inside the meta body that says, okay, who's out there? What body of people are out there? What shared goals, what shared aspirations do we have? How can we bring them together and begin to exchange knowledge, begin to see the bigger picture of what we're actually doing, what we're actually working on. So this is a diagram I came up with that sort of describes this this meta body, as I call it, right? So we have see on the right side here, here's the body of people. See it as a community, see it as a collective, see it as a group of people, right? Coming on and then hitting this shield here, and then being focused towards, some shared common protocol value outcome here, right? So you come in here, and this meta body, or the only function of the meta body is to say, hey, there are some common protocols we want to introduce here, right? Some shared values. If you join us, or if you look at some of these protocols or use some of the features, we get to a sort of a common stream, a focus stream that leads to something called the human organization, right? So meta body is kind of a name or placeholder for this other organization that would take care of building this kind of shield. And there's a reason why I don't want to call it, like the organization, or the Philip likes to call it the meta collective, right? So collective of collectives would be one way to describe it. But to me, this immediately, says, well, there is a group of people that is higher than the other group of people, right? There's a body of people in this meta collective that would start issuing commands and ways to work together to these other collectives, right? So for now, I just want to put a placeholder called the meta body in there. So it could be something, some activities we're already doing, with looking at the different collectives, talking to these people, and see how can we make sense, what kind of tools can we give them to work more in a more coherent fashion, right? To share some of the protocols and tool sets and the values we have with these other organizations, right? So that's the notion of the meta body. This meta body, again, I don't want to call it an organization, but the function is, a way to record, present, and preserve a body of actions. So that's the second piece of it, right? If you recall that, the body of people on one side, and then the body of actions as the other side. And we want to record, present, and preserve any of these actions, right, in a incorruptible ledger of people, for the people, and by the people, right? Kind of famous quote here. But the idea is, so these actions, whatever activities they have, right, is there a way to sort of save them, present them, and preserve them in this, I call it incorruptible ledger for now. I changed that word from what's the other word? I forgot. Immutable record, right? Which Philip suggested is too strong, because it means, unchangeable. Once you're in there, you can't, erase the record anymore. But that's really not the purpose of a ledger here. It's more about it stays there, and it's a true record. It's not been manipulated and changed in any fashion. Okay, so that's the meta body here, and the link to the social ledger here. So let's take a look at this diagram here. Recall at the beginning, right, there's a body of people linked to the body of work here. And what we're saying here, the social ledger is an incorruptible ledger of people, for the people, and by the people. So this stuff that goes into this layer here, right? This contains your profiles and what is it, plural, right? And all of the actions, right? And it's your data. You know, the stuff that you create, your profiles and the actions you create belong to you, right? Part of the social ledger, but you own that basically. And that's the function of connecting now, you know, the body of the people with the body of work inside this new layer here called the social ledger. And what would that mean, right, if we do that? And to me, the definition is, and we've brought this up in the past, right, to talk about what's the reasoning behind this, is really to begin building bridges to share knowledge flows and to enable these value ecosystems across large groups of people, right, large bodies of work. So you see here, there's a instantiation, right, you know, body after body after body of people, and whatever they create on their end, what they have, right? So the function of the social ledger is to be that bridge between these different islands of information, right? Between these silos of information, by sharing some of the profiles they have, some of the actions they did in a social ledger, and then you see suddenly, you know, the my profile, my action, my data changes to our profiles, our actions, and our data. Right, so something that we can share and build on and work on. You know, given that you're part of a story here, of a narrative we're creating together between certain bodies of people and certain bodies of work. Okay, here's the interesting thing. Back to Philip's original presentation 2.5 years ago, when he introduced the human organization. There's a diagram in there that fits pretty well into our thinking. You know, I was surprised to see that, and see how the ledger, the social ledger, would fit into this. So what this is, he calls is sort of a bread incorporated, like a neutral company. So this kind of, to me, is the meta body here that has subsidiaries, as he calls them, right? Bread A, bread B, bread C. To me, I see them as the collectives that we're starting to onboard, right? Groups, organizations, communities, onboarding, you know, community A, B, and C, right? And they operate in different foreign jurisdictions, right? They're somewhere located in, you know, in some place. There's so the function of the top level here, so the meta body is just to coordinate what's happening in bread A versus bread B versus bread C, right? And then he calls them the members of these communities companions here, and the circles or the groups they're operating within that as companion groups. And then there's an interesting thing, what he calls a companion API. So that was an early concept from Philip to say, hey, it's an API that these people actually can work together, right? So connect, reach out, and understand what is actually happening, what are they currently working on. And that, to me, is exactly the function of the social ledger here. So connecting stuff that's happening here, you share that in a circle over here in another organization, bread B, right? If you decide to share that, right? So you can have, starting to establish some linkage here between these organizations. So that's the structural piece on the human organization that I thought aligns well with the social ledger. Let's take a look at the other side. So I'm calling this part 2 here, to look at some of these progressive ways on how do you organize a body of work, right? So we talked about the body of people and different forms and shapes, you know, this can take. Now let's take a look at the body of work itself. So the actual outcomes, the products, the presentations, the charts, whatever it is that people are working on, the very reason why they come together and produce something, right? Should I take a breather here? Are we good? Moving on? Thumbs up. Okay. Thumbs up. All right. Let's move on and then talk after this. Part 2. So Here I want to introduce something again from John Kelden, the guy from the Conversation community, good friend of mine, who I've worked with seniors and knowledge expeditions a lot. He introduced a concept called generative sequences. That's a fascinating term to me. And one definition is that he says what this is. It's a safe passage through unknown territory, each step unfolding in the most fitting order for structure-preserving transformations, witnessing an emerging structure of wholeness. I mean, that's pretty fanciful, right? You have to stop and think about this definition of a generative sequence. But to me, you see it as a simple way of starting. You have a starting point here, right? And you want to get from point A to point B, right? And in between, there's some unknown territory, stuff you don't know, you haven't explored, you have never seen before, you never met people in this space before. How do you get from point A to point B, right? So these sequences provide you sort of a passage through this kind of territory, right? And it's a passage that's kind of hand-holding people to say, hey, if you want to get from A to B, well, then you maybe want to go here first, then here, and then over here, and then here. And that's where you arrive at point B, right? So that is, to me, a core piece I wanted to bring into the design and thinking of the social ledger. And why is that? Let's take a look at this. What we've seen so far is kind of an emerging structure coming out of the efforts that we've put into the social ledger. One is, see here, the body of people, if you put this into layers, so if you want to walk from, let's say, from the left side here all the way to the right side, right? And you can do this by choosing different paths, right? So you can go up here and then go down here, arrive at a place. You can go down here, you can go up here, arrive at a space. Go up here, arrive at what I call a card, and then go down here, arrive at an action, and then go down here and arrive at your destination, right? So if that's one of the possible paths, what are these choices here? What are these things in between? And obviously, number one is the body of people. So this is the types of organizations that we'd encounter. So this is the collectives, the communities, the work groups, the teams, some independent entities where we bring people together and they work on something, right? So they come together for a purpose. That's the first layer. So that's the top level, which we refer to as simply collective, right? A collective of people. So that means you choose one of them. Say you pick the Art Chain community as one example, and you arrive at the place. So the place is now the Art Chain community. That's your context for the next step. Right. So the next step is what I call here organizational elements. So that's the stuff we've been doing with breaking down a collective into different domains. Right. So what are the typical domains you see inside an organization? There can be operations, there can be practices, there can be project areas, there can be more specific functional areas. A legal area, marketing area, human resources area. But these are organizational elements here, right? So they pertain to a structure around the organization. So after you selected the body of people, you arrive at a place. Next step is you arrive at a space, right? So that's now the context, the more narrow context of where do you work in. So say again, Art Chain, you arrive at Art Chain, the space, and then maybe you want to look at the operations. How do they work together? And then there's a space for that. Here you go. And the next level here is the body of work. So this is where you start thinking about, okay, what is it that we're actually working on? What are we doing in this space, right? What are the activities inside the space? And that now talks obviously about, so we have meetings, we write documents, right? We produce reports, all kinds of activities that are happening inside this space, right? And to me now, the next anchor point here is what I call you pick a card. So a card representing one of the bodies of work that is currently going on in that space, right? So an example is a meeting card as sort of an abstraction of, okay, there are meetings in this space, right? So what does it mean that there are meetings in this space? So obviously you need to bring people together. There are certain roles people have, and then certain activities you have. So you pick one of the cards, and that becomes an instance of what I call the boundary object, which is akin to the social object, right? So you pick a meeting. So the meeting is the template for activities, right? So you pick that, and you say, okay, this is our meeting. So this is today's meeting here on Tuesday, and we're talking about this human organization deck, right? This is our meeting here, and out of this comes the action now. So we all joined the meeting. So this is the action that happened here, and we have different choices to go from here, right? So this is the last layer here to say, okay, what are the body of actions that could come out of this meeting, right? So are we going to have some meeting notes? Are we going to have some videos that we share? Is it another presentation that comes out of the meeting? So a body of actions that arrive at the last point. So you see, this is one example path now through this kind of emerging structure, right? Where the social ledger provides the foundational pieces, right? It helps you navigate through this, right? To figure out, okay, that's the community, that's the place, that's the space, that's the card, that's the action, and that's the outcome of whatever action we took. So that's this piece here, relating back again to John Callan's notion of a generative sequence, right? Talk about these boundary objects a little bit more detail. So this is a term coined by Susan Starley, and she says these are objects which are both plastic enough to adapt to local needs and the constraints of the several parties employing them, and then is still robust enough to maintain a common identity across the sites. So this is a more broader definition than the social object we have right now. So boundary objects are something that sort of stay alive across multiple places, communities, and they adapt, to the local needs. So there's an interesting definition around what really is a boundary object. I mean, we called it a lot, the social object as an attractor, right? So there's something that attracts a group of people to actually work on this piece, on this thing, whatever it is. And to me, this brings it a bit further and say, okay, there is an attractor, there's a thing we're working on, but it actually is attractive also to other groups, to other people in other spaces. The way we created a chart, let's say the Wardley map, for example, to me is an attractor it's a boundary object that we can take now and show it to other people and say, hey, this is the way we laid out the functional, value proposition aspects of our collective. Would you like to do the same thing for your environment, right? So it becomes an attractor and a boundary object that says, yes, this is very interesting. Maybe we create our own Wardley map, right? And then suddenly, because we're using the same type of methodology, we can start talking to each other. Makes sense on a much different level than if we were to use totally different approaches, right? I described it in this way, I describe it in that way. Hard to, come to a coherent picture here. Versus if we would agree to, this is the boundary object, a Wardley map, great, let's build some and let's compare notes, right? So that's a good starting point for me to have a sense-making conversation and a sense-making aspect of different communities working together. All right, let me go through the other things, places. So obviously the first one, could be there's a collective, cooperative, community, company, network, whatever it is, right? Physical, virtual, real. That comes from the knowledge expedition thing I've done in the past, which sort of makes the virtual space feel more real, right? So you're more immersed in the actual space, draws you into the place of work. That is not physical, not the place where you sit right now, but it's online. And it has some additional attributes, capabilities that makes it more immersive than just a pure virtual thing, just a link to a document. So that's the place. then the space, a trusted space in work context, where all of these stories can unfold, in what we've defined as holonic circles, and within that, in these circles, in these different committed roles. So I don't want to talk too much about organizational structure, because this will go into a discussion of, what's the best structure, and should we, prefer structure A over structure B, which is just not about that. This just says, okay, there's a work and work, there's circle within circle, there's a holonic thing that naturally aligns with the way we build the social ledger. And that's why I bring it up as a way to describe this trusted space and the work context. Then the next one was the card, right? So different kinds of cards, a tool card, a method card, a protocol card. By tool card, I mean something like you can evoke a certain tool set just by using that card. The example is the Zoom session, right? So it's a card about Zoom sessions that has certain functionality where you can invoke it, create it, see who was in the session, and link that to other cards that maybe describe a protocol card to describe a session, describe a typical meeting arrangement that says, so for every meeting, we want to record it. Like what we did today, right? I started the recording. That could be part of the protocol of how we are holding our meetings. And another part could be that we're saying we store that video in a repository, right? Could be a Google YouTube thing. And we have a place for storing all of these videos in there. Or it could be, we have our own, streaming server, and we have our own place to store these kind of videos. And that becomes the protocol, and that becomes the way to record meetings. But importantly, so the card is kind of setting the boundary. What I call it, it's really an affordance, that is tangible, it's there, it's clearly defined. You can enhance it, so you can add other functions to that card, and it's uniquely identifiable, right? So that to me is still a very good metaphor for describing what is happening inside the body of work of organizations, and that can be other cards too, right? So say you pick up a method card, something that John Calvin has been doing for many years. So a set of meta. If you don't know if you see that here, like something like this, where you throw in a new term into an organization, right? So I'll pick a card here, and it says Kairos, right? So Kairos is a term that describes, I call it the indeterminate moment in which everything happens. So away from Chronos, we are suddenly in Kairos environment, where time sort of starts to fizzle away, and you're inside the story. So that's an example here. So this is a method card where we bring it into the conversation, and it sort of steers it into a certain direction, right? So it steers the conversation into a direction of, okay, what is everybody's opinion on that? What do we want to do with this? And there are so many different method card decks out there, right? IDEO has created so many in the past. There's other card decks from other communities that are really helpful, in bringing that into a conversation. Decks that can really be shared now among the participants of this, right? And say, here's a good deck. Why don't you try to use it to solve this kind of problem, and bring this into the fold. So again, that's the idea of a card. Also, it's like a spime. That's something that John had brought up recently. So a spime is a term coined by this guy called Bruce Sterling. And he defines it as objects with informational support so extensive and rich that they are regarded as material instantiations of an immaterial system, fabricated by digital means and precisely tracked through space and time. I mean, that's another one of these, whoa, what's this kind of thing definitions, right? So you have to step back a little bit and reread it and see, what does that really mean? What does it say? But to me, it resonates because it's something we're doing again with the social ledger, right? So there are these objects we're looking at, right? And they provide this informational support. And as a card, as a metaphor, for something, that's kind of the instantiation of it, right? Of something that's happening in an immaterial world, right? And again, it's digital, and we track it through space and time because these cards appear in certain spaces at certain times, right? They're instantiated, and they give us sort of a chronological, history of what is actually happening in that space at that time. So it's a good metaphor, another, good word for describing what the social ledger wants to do with these ongoing activities, recording these ongoing activities. So SPIME is another good one here I added to this presentation. And if you take that term and say, okay, let's apply it to actually some of these cards we're talking about here, where now we're grounding, this is really the baseline, and say, okay, tell me more about this. What do you mean by these cards? And I really don't get it. It's too abstract. But so here's a set of cards from the other presentation that talks about, so here are the different aspects, so here's an identity card, right? Describes who you are. You can edit it, one of the functions here, and you can add more to your profile, right? And it identifies you and says, okay, this is Jim, and he has this contact information, and I can now start relating an identity to, say, another card, which is the wallet over here. So this is Jim's wallet. It's connected to some cryptocurrency account, right, that I can open, that I can see what's going on, and I can relate these two, right? So Jim has a wallet, and then further on, I can see, okay, with that information, I can start, say, video call, right? Now I know who is Jim, and he is identified in this environment. And as Jim, I can add a video call now, right? I can start creating a video call with other people. Or as Jim, I can go in there and start making decisions using a decision-making tool that's behind this card, right? And again, behind each card is a protocol. There is other cards that relate to this card that I can pull up. And they can be anything, right? There can be, here in the second row, you see, it can be a writing tool. It can be, and by writing tool, I don't want to make the obvious choice of saying we're going to a Google Doc and write this stuff up. This could be much more elaborate. The tool that Anders was talking about in terms of, there's, calls it a Zettelkasten, which is the German word for a box of cards, that a box that of index cards, and he's sort of starting to organize certain snippets of information and sort them, resort them, and share these cards with other people. That to me is a whole different way of thinking about a writing tool than the obvious one that we do today, which is pull up a Google document and then start writing on this in one lengthy session. So many other things can be related to that. Let me see who just joined. John. Hey, John. You're coming towards the end of this presentation, so stay tuned. We're recording this. You can look at this later. So other cards in the second row, right? There's a discussion, to say, hey, this is the place where we go for having our conversations. In our case, mostly Mattermost, but there are other tools out there too that we want to link to, like a Slack environment, like a Discord environment, or whatever comes up in the future. But it's open to different kinds of cards too. I'm putting up here a meditation card. It could be a 2-minute break in your day where you click on this card and it starts a recording session of some breathing exercise or something else you could do on your own, or maybe if you have a group of people using that same card, then it's a collective exercise. Or another card here, the P2P call, the stuff we actually have now in the first social ledger. You could see this as a card too, to say, hey, let me call Gary here. Click on this card, and Gary appears right there on the card in the context of the other cards that you're currently working on, right? So again, a way for you to start organizing your activities and to see what is a good path, So what am I going to work on today, back to John Calvin's generative sequence aspect, right? So today we want to, have a video call and need to make some decisions and want to write some stuff, right? So maybe that's our 3 cards I want to focus on for today. And the card already has all of the context, all of the information about you and the project. So it's just a matter of enabling these functions, right? And that's the next thing I wanted to talk about here. Besides the wallet, of course. So the wallet as, and that's kind of a draft definition. I don't know how to best describe it here. So I'm saying it's a new kind of coin to represent the value of an action or microtransaction at any scale, at any place, and at any time. So a way to say you've done something, you as simple as you clicked a button, you took an action, you joined the meeting, you wrote a document, whatever it is, right? That has a value associated with it, and that's recorded in, and that for that you can use the body to the wallet to give you some kind of a reward, for the action or for a transaction, meaning between 2 parties here. So if it's between you and me and you or some other entity, that's the transaction you wanted to record inside a currency representation of it, right? So you see there's a linkage here in the bottom between body of people, body of work, and body of actions. So to me, this is kind of a way to realize the flow between these 3 constituents, right? Between the body of people and what they do, and what are the actions actually, the buttons they press and the activities they do throughout the day. And that again, the currency is a good driver and system behind that, because that's kind of a record keeper of, okay, something happened, it's recorded. There's a historical transaction now of what I did, what I connected to, what I've been transacting with, and it's in reflected inside the wallet. So one good way of integrating this in the social ledger. The other thing is the action itself, right? So Jim pulled up this quote earlier, right? You are what you do, not what you say you'll do. So all your actions describe really who you are, not so much the profiles and these other metrics that are out there about you, but what you actually do. So these actions here described as kind of a new kind of social affordance that turns observers and lurkers into participants. So if you're confronted with, a card that says join, well, guess what? What do? You can join. If you're a card that says, hey, we want you to add some things to this chart, this diagram, this table, well, here's an action you can take, and do it. It's an affordance that's right there, right in your face. And the moment you do it, because I know who you are, and because I am in the right context of, the collective, the domain, the space, the group, the circle, I can record it now. It allows me to do that. And by doing these actions, right, I'll work on a document, I begin something new, I edit something here, and come to the end point. Again, that becomes the path, right, through the unknown territory that unfolds throughout the day, right? Just by following some of these steps here that are your steps, but also these are steps that you share collectively with your team, right? They have the same cards in front of them, and the same metadata is there inside their cards. So that's being recorded as well here. So that's another good metaphor. And that's it basically. There's a part 3 that's under construction. So given that we've talked a lot about here's the body of people here, what shapes do people gather around to get something done inside a body of work, which is the social ledger as a foundational piece to support both of these blocks here, right? And so the next thing is from this presentation, right? The human organization. Where do you go from here? How do you take this into a broader context? And to me, what I like to do is I want to reach out to a couple of the folks mentioned in this presentation and see what they think about it. Because I know they've been thinking about organizational design and organizational building for many, many years. And we're kind of stuck in a loop here where you can either work with existing organizations and try to transform them, which is not an easy thing to do. You know, I've been doing that for many years at Change Agents Worldwide. It's frustrating work, right? Or you can provide a new perspective to that and say, hey, maybe that's the kind of way you want to get organized, right? So basically bring groups of people together into this new way of working, right, that I describe in this context here, and see where you go from there. Maybe that's a better way of working, right? Maybe that's a partial way of how I want to work. I still have the old organization, but I still want to use some of these new ways and see if that's more efficient, if that's more effective, if that's more fun. You know, again, back to my earlier diagram here. Is it an environment where I can work? You know, is it an environment where I can learn some new stuff? Is it an environment that's fun? You know, that's enjoyable. That's there's some happiness going on in that space that I want to come back to. You know, so does that enable this? Can the social ledger enable some of these aspects, right? To rethink organizations, to rethink how we work, right? And go from there into, well, if that works, great, you know. And if I can meet other people here and see how they work, if I can see some of their protocols, some of their tools that they're sharing, great, you know. Why not being a little bit open here and say, yes, that part of my work, of my organization, we're ready to share that with the rest of the world, right? And we can learn from that too, and it helps all of us, right? So this common foundation, I think, is fundamental to at least what I see the social ledger is going to be in the future, right? This common onboarding, this common way of introducing new ways of working on technologies that we trust, right? Not technologies that we don't trust that are highly centralized, right? That are profit-driven, but technologies that enable us, you know, enable our potentials, our human potential here. And that's what I want to get at with the next generation of the social ledger. All right, I'll stop sharing. And back to you guys. So that was a lot of stuff to take in, right? I know.
A lot of stuff to talk about. I thought it was great. I think it was terrific. It feels sort of like the shift from an evolving idea to an emergent one. That is that it's taking form and shape and practical implementation. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, it was awesome. And a lot for anyone's bite, you know, like Michael's suggesting. I think you stretched people in a lot of directions. And it'll take some time for them to recover. You know, the only thing I guess that I feel was missing, and I don't know how you could add anything else to it, it already has so much in it, was sort of, you know, believability, you know, in terms of the architecture, that we could actually do all this that we were actually doing this magic. And I guess that's a whole nother hour presentation in itself.
Right, Jim. That's actually part 3 that you said at the end, right? So how do we make it happen, right? And that's really getting into the more technical nitty-gritty, right? Of right, what's the architecture? You know, are there actually people behind this? Have you prototyped it? You know, is there a way to see if it works in a real, you know, context? All these good things. That to me is really part of a third section here to talk about that. But that's great. Anything from you, Gary, John? John, you haven't seen much of this, but Gary, what do you think?
Yes, I decided shortly after it started that I would be watching it again. I should have been taking notes so I could refer back to them, but this idea of the reflector of the social ledger as a reflector of possibly disparate communities, and this idea. Did you call it a meta object or
a meta body? Meta body.
meta body? Okay. Yes, I want to go back and look at that diagram again because I was quite engrossed with that. I thought there was a lot there to that.
Great, thanks, Gary. Yeah, the reflector to me, it's if you, it's a good metaphor because you just have to bend it a little bit, right? So you have a new collective coming in, hitting this shield, right? And it just turn it into a slightly different vector, right? And say, okay, this actually, we want to meet over here, rather than, bend and then you're back to somewhere else in your own space, right? But bend it slightly to say, hey, why don't we go this path? And suddenly this is where everybody else is, right? It's not only you, but it's 1,000 other collectives over here hitting this shield, right? And then they're all realizing, whoa, if we change some slightly in a way of working, right, we arrive at this other point, right? And this is a highly concentrated, highly focused point where suddenly the heat, goes up. And you realize that others are working on the same protocols, same tool sets, same processes, right? And they work, they've learned it works, they willing to share how it works, then it bundles a lot suddenly, right? So you really get into sort of a vortex here of, whoa, ideas and knowledge and stuff that's emitting out of this shield concept, right? And that to me is like a fascinating aspect, right? Why haven't we done this before, right?
Well, I think there was one attempt to do something similar like this that I can recall in 1066, when William the Conqueror took over the Brits. He began an inventory of everything within reach, and that was called the Doomsday Book, because it was generally believed that if you were collecting all that data, it was because it's all going down. Now, I think we've got something very similar happening here. It's sort of the Undoomsday Book that you're putting together there. It's a vital, the spime concept, making something material from a virtual space, and its substance is substantial, to put it in a loop. And that's what I'm feeling here, the social ledger becoming the emergence of social behavior.
Right. And John, thank you to you for bringing up this spime thing here, right? I haven't heard before, and that resonates so well in certain aspects. I mean, to me, it's one of many metaphors I want to use in the presentation. I don't want to say this is the way to create spimes, right? Who am I to say this? But it's a good metaphor to say, hey, this thing, right, that now concentrates a lot of the thinking into an object. And by the way, there's a whole history around that object, right? And by the way, you can go back and forth and see what's going to happen to this object. And by the way, it's also shared with other people, and it's out there, right? And it can be improved, right? It can be enhanced as making it a better object going forward. So there are so many things in playing into this metaphor, concept of a spime here. Really like that. So yeah, how are we doing on time? Oh, already 12:09. That was quick. That was
one concern I had was that in presenting the reward system, so to speak, we have to disassociate that with, compensating people for their value in the organization. It's an aspect of recognition of value, it's credit for doing things, which can be translated to some direct compensation or whatever. I think it's a little scary to jump into this as, if I don't play cards, I'm not going to.
You don't play cards well, you're out of the game. But
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, Michael.
yeah. I'm thinking on slide 26. It is a dangerous area when everything's sort of being framed into one box, and that can give people a little anxiety about what is the consequence of their situation behavior. My suggestion would be, say, instead of a new kind of coin, I'd say new kinds of coins.
Mm-hmm.
Make it plural so that there's a variety of channels through which the distinction between paying people for functions, internal, external, all the various dimensions within which some action can be identified and acknowledged, recorded, ledgered. Yeah.
Cool. I like that. That's right. It's not only one currency here. We want to cover a lot of different currencies. But I do want to stay in the game field of cryptocurrencies here. Because to me, the way I see this is there's a sort of an entry piece where I say, okay, let me create this wallet thing here at the front.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of the money part. And then let's forget about this. Right after you've done this, forget about it.
Forget it. Yeah.
Now you have an account somewhere running, right? Where, you know, your flows go in and out, right? But it's your focus is over here now on the activities and the actions, right?
Yeah.
So now you're just thinking about, well, I need a great tool for meeting, for video conference calls, so let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm focusing on the tool and the fact that, you know, you don't want to think about, oh, it's going to cost me so much money, right? You do want to see, okay, there's a certain currency related to, you know, for setting up this tool. So the value of this is much more represented in that than thinking about, whoa, this is going to cost me money, or how will I be compensated for doing this, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You want to separate the what's in it for me factor from the what the hell am I doing anyway?
Right.
The key issue is what you're doing. It's the score comes later.
Yes.
So I made the change here.
Oh, good. Thanks, Jim.
Represent any type of value.
Yeah. Yeah. Take out the opening indefinite article, A.
All right.
Now we've done it.
Thank you. Real-time editing. Good collaboration, folks.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, I think that was a real powerful one. I'd say wrap it before we say anything stupid. And it's a great recording.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I'll post the recording later on, and feel free to share this, right? Good.
Okay.
Later.
Thank you.